Welcome to the Prevention and Education on Abuse and Neglect of People with Disabilities PowerPoint for this month's in-service. This discussion is based on the teachings of the Georgia Collaborative ASO and their partners. Our objective is to learn about prevention and educating individuals on the subject of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, as well as techniques to educate individuals regarding this topic. The Eighth Amendment protects all citizens from cruel and unusual punishment. All people have the right to be free from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Abuse and neglect of people with disabilities are unacceptable. The first thing we want to do is know what the definitions of abuse, neglect, and exploitation are by looking at these categories. The first one is physical abuse. Physical abuse is inflicting or threatening to inflict physical pain or injury on a vulnerable individual or depriving them of a basic need. Emotional abuse, inflicting mental pain, anguish, or distress on a vulnerable individual through verbal or nonverbal acts. Sexual abuse is non-consensual sexual contact of any kind, coercing a vulnerable individual to witness sexual behaviors. Exploitation, the illegal taking, misuse, or concealment of funds, property, or assets of a vulnerable individual. Identity theft is also considered a form of exploitation. Neglect, refusal or failure by those responsible to provide food, shelter, health care, or protection for a vulnerable individual. Abandonment, the desertion of a vulnerable individual by anyone who has assumed the responsibility for care or custody of that individual. Some potential examples of abuse could be, for physical abuse, rough physical handling, pushing and pulling, unnecessary or excessive use of restraints, bathing in water that is too hot or too cold. Some examples of emotional abuse could be exposure to domestic violence, insults and harassment, denial of conditions necessary for physical and emotional well-being, denial of communication, denial of right to family life, denial of social interaction and inclusion, denial of economic stability, denial of rights, needs, privileges, and opportunities, and denial of ordinary freedoms. Some potential examples of exploitation could be using the car, money, or other possessions of someone with a disability without their consent. Tricking or threatening the individual to purchase an item or services that they do not want or that they will not be used for their benefit. Some potential examples of neglect could be not working assigned hours or not performing duties, withholding medications, food, medically necessary treatment, or assistive equipment, withholding necessary personal medical care such as repositioning individuals with mobility impairments, ignoring dietary restrictions, leaving individuals alone without a way to call for help, not providing appropriate levels of supervision which results in harm to the person, leaving individuals in bed all day or not getting them dressed, leaving individuals on the toilet or in soiled undergarments for a long period of time, injury caused by leaving objects of potential harm accessible to the individual, unsanitary, unsafe living conditions, inadequate clothing, especially for the prevailing weather conditions, and inadequate food. The statistics of abuse among individuals with disabilities are as follows. 63% of individuals with disabilities have experienced some form of abuse. 27% have experienced sexual violence, and 30% have experienced abuse from their own family members. The risk factors for abuse include increased dependency on others for long-term care, the individual's perception of being powerless, abuser's potential belief that abuse or neglect may not be discovered due to the victim's disability, victims' fear that they will not be believed or lose their service if they tell someone, inadequate education on appropriate and inappropriate physical and sexual behavior, increased social isolation, and small social network that can lead to an increased risk of exploitation. Unfortunately, some barriers to reporting abuse include victims sometimes refuse to acknowledge that there is a problem. Individuals with disabilities are often taught to be compliant and passive, and are sometimes unable to distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate physical contact. Individuals with disabilities may feel their report of abuse would not be believed. Physical, cognitive impairments make it difficult for the victim to seek help. Many individuals with disabilities find it difficult to report abuse because it may be difficult to describe the experience verbally. They may fear losing a long-time support staff or caregiver. They may fear retaliation for reporting certain staff, or they may not have enough information about abuse to know if they can get help. We can empower a person to report when we educate on anonymous reporting and confidentially. Build confidence through continuous education on how to report. Encourage to report even if they're unsure. Build trust by always following up on concerns. If you promise to do something, then do it. Explain that it is their right to be safe and to report it. Explain how reporting can help protect others. Acknowledge any fears about reporting and address them. Assure there will not be any retaliation. So now we are going to focus on some techniques to help educate individuals on abuse. We can start with community inclusion. For example, interactions with community members and programs that build connections and relationships beyond the service environment that are essential for individuals with disabilities. By enhancing valued status is achieved through giving individuals opportunities to form relationships, demonstrate competence, exercise citizenship rights, and meet social responsibilities. By raising awareness and education is vital in the prevention of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. An increased awareness establishes a culture of transparency of the issues and encourages those who have experienced abuse to seek assistance. We can create a culture of trust and awareness. So, with abuse, neglect, and exploitation, they're less likely to occur in environments that are positive towards people with disabilities and value their status. Services that integrate with the community and do not segregate or isolate people with disabilities. Services that encourage risk awareness, take steps to prevent harm, and report all incidents as early as possible. Staff that are appropriately trained and equipped with relevant knowledge and strategies. Education is extremely valuable when we teach our individuals about personal boundaries and safety, learning to say no. Ascertaining good, bad, and confusing touches. Identify private parts of the body as being parts of the body covered by bathing suits or undergarments. Understanding that their bodies belong to them and they have the right to say no to anyone who touches them in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable. Identifying when secrets should and should not be told, what are good and bad secrets. Pinpointing specific people to go to for help. Some examples of teaching our individuals about abuse could be in the following ways. Individually and in group settings with examples. Examples can be visual, verbal, and demonstrated. You can use YouTube pictures, stories, role-playing, open and/or confidential discussions. Through the encouragement of questions and providing answers, by engaging in conversations, avoid interrogations or assigning blame. By creating a positive learning culture that encourages interaction and active engagement in learning. We also need to learn how to consider learning styles. Everyone's different. So determine the individual's learning style. Ask what are the preferences on how to learn about abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Visual and auditory learners, you can use role play, videos, and pictures to portray concepts. For hands-on learners, use scenarios to act out and demonstrate concepts. Prevention is the best way to stop abuse before it starts. Abuse, neglect, and exploitation is everyone's business. So we need to learn the warning signs, know what they are, and don't be afraid to ask a lot of questions. We need to develop and increase the individual circle of support. We also need to refer the individual to a person or staff that they trust, and educate the individual on abuse, neglect, and exploitation. These are a couple of links on YouTube, and they are great examples of individuals with disabilities and interaction with their staff in a positive manner. If you're interested in watching either one, please feel free to contact Staff Development at extension 268, and we can reference you where to find those videos. I want to give a special thank you to those associations that are listed above for their time and effort in educating individuals and staff on what to do in a situation of any suspected abuse. Thank you for your participation in this training and your service to our individuals. After viewing, be sure to complete the test available at your work site or your email. Turn the test into your supervisor for grading and submission to staff development. This concludes our in-service on prevention and education on abuse and neglect of people with disabilities. Thank you.